Thank you. So I've done a bit of rephrasing with the title because we've done a couple of pieces together. So the title I'm presenting today is Towards a Normative Change Framework in Child Labor. And you're looking at legitimacy, social norm, and procedural norm. So this project just picks from what Lord presented. And I'll delve much into how the social norms become an impediment when we are talking about the legal frameworks within child labor. And I would like to acknowledge my team, which are my supervisors, Prof. Lucy Jordan and then Clifton, and then our RAs. So the agenda, I'll talk specifically about how social norms interplay within the idea of child labor, and talk specifically about institutionalization of social norms and how we can tease out the idea of procedural norm and justification within social norms, and then how we studied this idea within the fishing and cocoa industry in Ghana, and talk about some the key findings, and the implications for policy and then implementation. This is the 2018 data from ILO, and it shows that out of the 246 million estimated cases of children within child labor, 48 million are within sub-Saharan Africa. And 70% of these cases are found within the agricultural sector in sub-Saharan Africa. So in essence, we can say that the agri sector becomes the main hub for child labor in sub-Saharan Africa. And the two main occupations identified in this field are fishing and cocoa in Ghana. The idea of social and cultural norms are key causes of child labor, in addition to the economic factors. And even some evidence do show that these factors mediate the economic forces when we are talking about factors that influence child labor. Social norms regulate actions within the social order because they become sort of the normative frameworks that motivate people to act in a particular way. So in a community where we have these social norms that support child labor, there is that shared expectation among people to engage children in child labor. And those who deviate from it are considered as deviants within such societies. So if you do what we term as the right thing to do, which is to avoid children from engaging in labor, you may be characterized as engaging in a deviant activity in some of these communities. And where social norms are institutionalized, people conform to them out of a sense of duty and a responsibility. And that's the basis of and the need for us to look at social norms when we are talking about child labor, because they are deep-rooted and they commit, when people who are committed to child social norms sort of have that kind of moral obligation to do the thing that satisfies the expectation of the community. Until we change these norms, we feel that the reality that we are looking at, which is to prevent children from engaging in child labor through our legal frameworks, might not work. And researchers do recognize that it's an unimaginable task when we are talking about how do we change social norms. But then evidence indeed has shown that there has been some improvement in this field, especially there has been improvement in norms about tobacco use and then vaccine usage with the recent COVID-19 vaccines. So there is that sort of precedent which we wanted to build on to see how we can change social norms within child labor and ensure that we realize our goal of what? Preventing children from engaging in child labor. Our focus for this was to contribute to the research agenda on social norm change by presenting an analytic framework supported by empirical data on how we can change social norms within child labor. We started this project with a systematic review, and we reviewed literature across the globe on social norms that underpin child labor and the evidence catalog key social norms, including informal apprenticeship norm, gender norms, and norms regulating the asset value of children. That's communities where parents perceive children to have an asset value. So they engage them in child labor to fulfill that asset obligation. And there are also norms on sustenance and succession. So in communities that we have these norms, children are engaged in child labor so that they can achieve the goal of trying to fulfill the sustenance and succession rule within the community. And there were the vertical value of obedience. And this particularly was against the right for children to have a say, or children to participate, or children to have the agency against actions that motivate or that pushes them into child labor. So where these values are at play, children are the right for children to participate or have a decision on their own are somehow relegated. The normative expectation to inherit and maintain the legacy and identity of the family also inform child labor practices within some specific areas. And these were evidence contained in the systematic review. The idea about social norm, one critical aspect of social norm are the institutionalization process of social norm. So when social norms are institutionalized, and we're talking about where deliberate violations of these norms are sanctions within the community. So there are punishment and reward mechanisms that are aimed at enforcing these social norms. Sanctions enforces not only the norm among those who have violated it, but it also elicits commitment among those who are already committed to the norm. So if you violate the norm, where they are institutionalized, there are sanctions that will make sure that you commit to the norm. And these sanctions also elicit commitment from people who are already committed to the norm. And it makes sure that the boundary of the norm is not set loose. So when social norms are enforced by physical punishment, and in some cases, Durkheim argues that sanctions are also enforced by internal sanctions in the form of guilt and shame. So where people have this innate commitment to these social norms, violation of it causes them a guilty feeling or shame for engaging in something that is normatively unworthy. So parents who fail to involve their children in child labor, literature shows that they are stigmatized in communities where these social norms are deep-rooted. Also, some evidence has shown a strong positive relationship between social norms and child labor practices. What we have argued, or what we have tried to do in this research, is to analytically disentangle the concept of, unravel the concept of procedural norm and justification from social norm. So we did two things. What we did was to characterize what we call the constituted norm and the constitutive norm. So actions may be legitimate traditionally if they are consistent with social norms. Actions are also legitimate and justified if there is a positive outcome of a rational calculation or a normatively justified as right or wrong. Let's take this case example. Assuming in a community where the process of appointing a leader is determined by an ordinary committee members, where each man will have 2 votes and each woman will have 1 vote. So the idea is that 1 man, 2 votes, 1 woman, 1 vote. These are some of the repercussions. The women in this community will object to this decision on the basis that the procedure is illegitimate. It violates the institutionalized egalitarian values. So the idea is about the procedure is wrong. However, despite the illegitimate constitutive procedure, a legitimate decision could be reached because at the end of the day, they will appoint a leader who is appointed through a democratic value procedure, so a democratic outcome. So what we are arguing is that in some cases, the constitutive procedure may be wrong, but the constituted norm may be right. When we look at norms from this framework, they will make a headway to look at how we can specify either an illegitimate procedure or an illegitimate constituted norm. So case 2, for example, if the appointment is changed, that okay, everyone has 1 vote, irregardless of the gender. The outcome will be that yes, the procedure here is legitimate because it is considered as the right specification of the egalitarian value in the community. However, the outcome may be illegitimate if, assuming, for instance, if we have a lot of women, a lot of men in the community, and they all decide to vote for the men. So what we are trying to do is to look at how we can take this difficult task by changing social norms, by characterizing the 2 main constituents of social norms, which are the procedural norm and the constituted norm. So this framework guided the project. The first thing we did was to look at how we can develop this framework to better understand the social norms and the justifications around social norms. So we assume that if there is a legitimate constituted procedure, it should lead us to a constituted norm that is legitimate. And this enforces the norm. However, in some cases, with the broken lines shown, there can be a case where the legitimate procedure can lead to an illegitimate outcome, as I've shown in the example. An illegitimate procedure can also lead to an illegitimate outcome, which is the direct prediction. But in some cases, it can also lead to a legitimate outcome. Last part is that there can be procedures that are established with a chicanery, political deception. Irrespective of the outcome, it cannot be justified. So this model guided us to better understand the justifications around social norms and how we can specify some of these to ensure that we achieve the goal of changing social norms. So in example, for instance, the norm of inheritance, which was evident in the literature review, can be considered as a legitimate within the legal order, because even within the legal order, there are wills that parents do for their children so that they can inherit their properties. But when inheritance is used as a procedural activity or procedural norm to justify child labor, then we think that this can be illegitimate within the legal order. So our objective was to look at, one, the social norms, two, the constitutive procedure that are used to justify the constituted norms, and then how situational sanctions are relevant in enforcing social norms. We answered the first one through the systematic review, which has been published, and we'll encourage the audience to look out for this on the conference website. The second question and the last question were pursued in this project. We did this by using the practice research community-based approach, by engaging with the community members to build a bottom-up knowledge, to collaborate and then build a co-produced knowledge. So our first stage was to engage 8 community stakeholders within these child labor communities, and also engage them by asking them how we can better research this topic, what questions we should ask, how should we go about this, and then together with them, we arrived at a conclusion to use what we know as the Vignier approach. So with the Vignier approach, we developed the stimulus. And these 2 stimulus are presented here. So they are case examples, and they are aimed at eliciting people, the views of the parents, to be able to categorize them into those who are more likely to engage their children in child labor, or those who have even engaged their children in child labor. This stimulus question is aimed at categorizing them from those who are less likely or may not have engaged their children in child labor. So we developed these 2 groups using the Vignier stimulus. And then after this, we developed case studies with the initial community members and knowledge from the literature review to conduct narrative interviews. So we piloted it with 6 stakeholders in the community, and then we did a main interview with 40 community members, parents, including 20 within the highly likely group, and then the less likely group. So we have 20 for each. And then we engaged 10 additional community stakeholders. Now, eligibility criteria was that the person should have stayed in the community for at least 24 months. This was to ensure that at least they have knowledge about the norms and how it regulates child labor activities in these communities. And they should have at least 1 child. Of course, we are looking at child labor. So if you don't have no child, it does present, we don't see how you can respond to our questions very well. And then they were also required to be identified as either full-time farmers or fishermen or women. So our sample showed that we had parents between the ages of 35 to 80 years, and 80% of them had at least stayed in the experience of 10 years within their occupations. So it showed that at least we engaged people who had knowledge about the practice and extensive knowledge about the practice. And at least each participant have stayed in their respective community for more than 11 years. And their educational category is also presented here. So on the norms, the common theme that ran through most of the narrative was the norm on inheritance. So these occupations, the fishing and cocoa practices, are considered as family businesses. And these families consider them as what? Something they inherited from their forefathers or their generations. And they feel that their children should also inherit. And there's that normative in the intergenerational cycle that runs through. And these norms mandate them to ensure that at least their children also develop this innate commitment to continue with their family business. And for them to do that, the best time to do that is their childhood. So when the children are young, you engage them. So there's that saying that catch them young. So they engage them as they catch them young and then imbibe the spirit or the commitment in them. And then they also develop the interest in doing the child labor. So for them, they don't see it as something that is wrong. And this was evident in the narrative presented here. But then we looked at the procedural justification. For them, the good thing about this and the justification for them to abide by the norm of inheritance is to ensure that when they engage the children in the activity, it ensures that they maintain the boundaries of their farmland so that when they die and the children are to inherit the farms, no one will cheat them. So you engage the children, they know where you are farming, they know where your farmland is. And then when you die, the child takes over. And there's also the idea of family legacy and symbol of identity. There are parents who told us that the entire community is identified with this symbol, that look, this community is a cocoa community. So if you are here and you are not doing cocoa, then you are more or less considered as a deviant within a community. And you have to do this to maintain the legacy of your family based on the reputation you have. And for you to do that, engage your children so that they can also continue. So the family legacy and the symbol of identity is considered as a procedural justification for abiding by the norm of inheritance. And evidence from our coding, we showed that we had more than 270 codes on inheritance. And there are also standards on hardware. So parents argue that there's that norm that children should have that innate commitment and to be hard workers. And for them to achieve this, they need to engage them in their work. They need to engage them in the sea fishing and they need to engage them in the cocoa industry. And these were justified by the fact that the parents believe that without hardware, the children will not succeed. So success was used as a justification for engaging children in child labor to achieve the norm of hard work. There are also norms on informal apprenticeship training, which were justified by the idea of alternative skills. Parents had told us that there are even high rate of unemployment in Ghana. And for children to go to school and come back and they won't have any job to do, engage them in the work, they learn and they get an alternative source of income. And for some, they were even providing income to their parents as children. So they increased the sources of the family income. And these were used as clear justifications for abiding or trying to achieve this norm on informal apprenticeship training. With regards to sanctions, there were informal.
If just 1 minute, please. Sorry,
okay.
I'm abusing.
No problem. There were informal structures, and then also there were psychological rewards in the sense that if you engage your children in the child labor, you are being rewarded. And there were insult and retaliation for those who did not engage their children in child labor. So we argue that at the end of the day, this framework is telling us that the constituted social norm might not be wrong if you analyze it analytically, but the procedural norm which we have teased out in this study can help us to better frame our interventions, targeting these procedural norms to re-specify the procedural norms to achieve the constituted norm. For instance, an intervention we are promoting is that we should promote technical and vocational education in the child labor hubs and also promote the commercialization of cocoa and fishing so that they will not be considered as a family business and children will be impelled to inherit. And a true pronged educational approach is promoted by looking at curriculum education and complex community-wide education. So to conclude, we argue that our research has looked at the social norms that underpin child labor. And we've also went ahead to look at how we can change these social norms from being risk factors to protective factors by targeting the procedural justification or the constitutive norms that underpin these social norms or these constituted social norms. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Alhassan. I'm sorry to have pushed you a bit. Is there any questions from the floor with a hand raised that I can't see? I haven't got any question in the chat just yet on your presentation.
There's one question from Prachi.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Samantha and Alhassan, for this amazing presentation. My name is Prachi. I am a student at Columbia and interning at UNDP. I'm interested in eliminating child labor. I loved this presentation. And I particularly love when you talk about embedding fishing and cacao as curriculum, right? Because that would make sure that it is being passed on the way what parents like, and at the same time combine it with policy. I have a quick question, and maybe I've misunderstood, right? And that is, we're talking about making a procedural norm. And for that, even if you imbibe curriculum of fishing, but these are more tangible, you have to go there and on the job training kind of skills, right? So when we talk about curriculum, I'm thinking of the practical aspect of it, because parents would still want, no, it is a family thing and it has to be on the job training and not something you can learn in school. So I'm thinking on the practical side of it. And could you please elaborate on when we say procedural norms, how would these two connect? Yeah, I think that's my question. Was that clear?
Okay, thank you. So maybe I should respond to this. Okay, so I mean, this a broader project, so I just presented this aspect, but the basis for the education, I mean, trying to build the curriculum or the technical education within the community is that parents do tell us some sources based on analysis. They told us that even though these norms are there, they did recognize in some of the communities that the education that has been carried out tells them that, look, if you engage your children in this and this and that, it is wrong. So they could tell us on the surface some issues that are wrong based on the education they have received. So we feel that based on that, if we develop the idea of promoting the intersection of the norms. So the parents are telling us that they want their children to inherit their businesses. They want to give them the informal training, and these are the best place for them to get it. But they also want their children to succeed. So if they want their children to succeed, then they should have the modern means to what? To succeed, which is the modern means through the technical and vocational training. And there were quotes or narratives where the parents told us that there were instances where children in their community, they were part of the fishing team. And then they developed the skill of mechanical skills where they could repair some of the boats that get faults on the sea. And they did that. Some whites came to the community and they tested them that, look, what skill do you have? And these students showed up that we can repair the boats of this fishers. I mean, the engine of this boat when they are on the sea. We can repair it when it gets a fault. And then the wives were like, okay, that's fine. Then do it for us to see. They did, and they sent them to Spain. This was in our narrative. So what this means is that the parents are really interested in looking at the sources at the end of the day. And some of these norms intersect at the end of the day to look at how we can make their children successful. I want them to inherit my business, yes, to uphold the value of the community or the identity of the family, but also to make sure that they are successful. Hard work to make sure they are successful. Informal apprenticeship training to make sure they are successful. So when you implement a program that tries to give them a modern way of becoming successful, which is through the technical and vocational training, I think practically it will make sense.
Thank you. I think that's a wonderful example and perfectly answers. So thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right, sorry about that. Thanks for your question and answer. Then I have another couple of questions in the chat, if I may put them now.
Sure.
The first one is, what does your research suggest about the function of child labor as part of child socialization with a positive impact, rather than only through the lens of negative impact of child labor?
Please, the question again.
So the question, if I may reframe, and hopefully that's right, can child labor be seen as part of the socialization of the child with a positive impact?
Okay, thank you. So I think, so that's from a research point of view and from the framework that I've seen and from the literature review that I've done. socialization becomes a broader context when we still want to use socialization as a context. If you look at socialization, in what sense? Is that about the training? Is it about the family obligations that children has to commit, or the community obligation? Socialization to me is still broad when we try to subsume the whole concept under socialization. But when we look at the other aspect of it in terms of how the people who engage their children in some activities that we term as part of their socialization, then we can better understand the situation. It cannot be considered as a positive aspect of it based on the rationale or how we've teased the concept out. So we can still we can still bring together the idea of informal apprenticeship training as a form of socialization. Trying to make children hard work as a form of socialization. But these concepts, when we tease them out, when we analyze them individually or independently, we can see that they are normative frameworks that are not geared towards making their children bad from the sense of the parents. But from our point of view, that is wrong. And that is why we want to still go down, move from socialization, come back to the ideal concepts, come down to the procedural norms that are used to justify it. Then at the end of the day, if we still want to socialize children to achieve some sort of informal apprentice training, we can still get it, but we have misspecified the procedure to make sure that the procedure are consistent with the legal order, and they're also consistent with their social order. Then we can change the reality. I don't know if I've answered this correctly.
Thanks, Alhassan. I mean, the person who asked that probably could comment if you've answered that question fully. I'd like to direct your attention to one more question in the Q&A, but that might deserve to be answered in writing so everybody can benefit.
Okay.
It's quite specific, I think. And then we can move on to the third panelist, and then maybe have a bit more time for general question at the end.